In this segment, we're going to begin a series of videos dedicated to the form building process in HR Actions. We'll walk through each step associated with the form building process and discuss the options for each of those steps. Once we've gone through each of those, we'll actually have another segment where we create a form from start to finish, go through every step completely, and then make that form accessible so managers or employees can actually access that. So to begin, we're going to be in the HR Actions admin side. We're going to go to the form section and we're going to click on Build Edit Form. When you do that, we're starting from scratch here, and you can see the first tab is General Setup. In the General Setup, this is where we name the form. So the form name will be whatever shows up at the top of the form. This could be a new hire form, a promotion form. Whatever we're doing with this action, we'll name that form, accordingly. Then you can see we've got instructions: form, field, approval, and submit. These are different segments in the form where you can provide more specific information as to how you want somebody to complete the form. And you can see over here, you can edit that with the pencil. For each of these, you've got up to 1,500 characters in HTML. So you can make it bold, you can do different fonts, different sizes, things like that. But you can provide the instructions and make the form easier to use for the end user, manager, or employee. Form footer, text area at the bottom of the form. You can put, a company slogan there, or maybe, if you have any additional questions, contact HR with the contact information, whatever you'd like there. And then we get into form types. And you can see here, existing employee is the first one, and by far the most common. An existing employee form means that the employee already exists in HRMS. So when we initiate an action on an existing employee, we're going to get 2 columns of data: what currently exists in HRMS, where you can see where they're at, job title, whatever we have on the form. And then the next column would be proposed changes, where we can say, hey, we want them to move from this position to that position, or hey, here their pay effective date was this, now it's this, and here's their new rate. So you can see where they're at currently and where they're going, and then you can initiate that form, and then the approvers can see all that information as well. The next form type, the transfer to new supervisor and or organization, technically an existing employee form, but this has a stored procedure process that when we change the new supervisor, it automatically adds that receiving side of the organization. It mirrors the current approval process. So if the manager initiates it and says, hey, you're going to this new manager, it automatically adds the new manager to the approval sequence so they can verify the information as that employee is coming to them. So existing employee form type, but it has a little magic at the end because it automatically updates the approval sequence and adds the receiving side. The new hire form type, this is a form type where it's building in a brand new record in HRMS. In theory, this employee doesn't exist, so you've got a single column of data. We're entering just the information because we don't have existing information. Now, this new hire form will tell you if you run into a situation where when you enter the social, for instance, it may pop up and say, hey, this social number already exists in this employer. And then you can figure out what you want to do. If you want to change it to a rehire form and update the existing record, or we've got clients that want to keep it separate and just make a brand new record. Maybe this employee was hired years ago and you want a completely new record. So you can do either one. It'll pop up and tell you and ask you what you want to do. And then the last form type is the leave of absence, OSHA, OHS. Separate form type, it tracks the leave of absence information or accident information for things like OSHA now. Form category, you can choose these, you can name them, but basically it helps you sort forms when you're looking for it in the search function. And then form options. When we get down here, for instance, this one, the first one is employee initiated. So an employee-initiated form would be something like maybe an address change or emergency contact, phone number, anything that you'd want the employee to be able to initiate. You wouldn't want an employee to be able to initiate job information. I want a new job. I want a new compensation number, something like that. But anything that the employee could initiate, attendance request, that you want them to do it, you'll check this box. And when you do that, that option makes it available to the employee on the self-service side of that. So that form would be available once we grant access to it. Along the same lines, accessible to a manager will make this form available to any manager, and then they would have access to initiate this form on any of their direct or indirect reports. So anybody that reports to me, I can initiate it on. If I've got somebody that reports to one of my direct reports, I'll be able to drill down and initiate this action on that employee as the manager. And then this one, the accessible to a universal initiator. This one's typically HR payroll type people where we don't have that reporting relationship in HRMS, but we may have the need to initiate one of these actions on anybody. So for instance, HR may need to be able to initiate any action on any employee at any time. So we would set them up as a universal initiator in the system, and then when we grant access to this as accessible to the universal, we can also grant access to this specific form to that universal. Another example may be where we've got a senior executive that wants their executive admin assistant to process some forms. We can create a form, we can grant it to the universal initiator, and then depending on that universal initiator security, we can grant it to them. Maybe this universal has access to this form but doesn't have access to anything with compensation on it. Or maybe this is a form for a safety officer where they need access to every employee in the organization, but only this one specific form. But if it's granted here and then we grant it at the proxy level, which we'll discuss in another video, then they've got access to that and only that form. Include payroll fields. If we want to be able to update maybe some tax fields or anything like that, we can check that box and then choose which one we want, U.S. payroll, Canadian payroll, depending on the client needs. Include performance appraisal fields. This opens up a couple different tabs down the road where we actually create the questions and the scoring and all of that for a performance appraisal form. And we'll do a completely separate video segment on the performance appraisal process and how that works. But you can see here, once you enable this, send to employee manager, they can go back and forth, hide approver comments from the subject, hide employee contact from the manager until it's initiated, back and forth, but vice versa on all that. And then we skip down here, allow approvers to edit this form. With this step, checked, what you're doing is you're saying, hey, when I initiate this, so typically the most common process is a supervisor initiates an action on their employee. Say I want to give them a pay increase or I want to give them a promotion, whatever it might be. I initiate that, and then typically the approval sequence, maybe it goes to my manager, to a director, to HR. Again, depending on what your needs are, you can get very complex approval sequences with HR actions. But whatever that process is, typically that hierarchy means that it's higher in authority at each step. So if you check this box, you're saying, hey, any approver can edit this form and make changes. So an example I use, I'm a supervisor. I said I want to give my employee a 5% increase. Well, when it went to my manager or my director, budget constraints said, well, we can't do 5, but we can do 3. So we're saying, hey, rather than kick it back, having me start over, we're saying the manager can edit that and they can change it from 5 to 3. Anytime approvers edit a form, an audit trail captures the changes and does a date timestamp and who made what changes. So you can see every field that was updated as part of that edit. Pre-populate required fields with current values on the first load. This was a client enhancement request, but what it does is it says if you require a field, so on the form process you can say, hey, this field is required. It needs to have a value in it in order to initiate this action. So if you want that required field to pre-populate with whatever's in the system currently, you can check that box. In my mind, if you've got a required field, you typically want those blank to make the initiator or an approver, whoever doing this, think about what they want in that value. So think about an effective date. You could tell the system to set the effective date as whenever the form was initiated. Doesn't make a lot of sense there because we want them to think about it, especially for pay changes. Typically, forms aren't initiated on the pay effective date. So you want them to think about when this is actually going to be effective. In my mind here, if you're requiring a field, you want them to think about it. You don't want it to be the one that's currently in the system, but you have that option. Allow duplicate forms to be processed at the same time. What this does is the way the system works is it takes a snapshot of data when you initiate it. So if I'm doing a pay change form, for instance, I initiate it and says, hey, here's what the data was, here's what the proposed changes are, and then it goes through the approval process and routes and gets everybody sign off, and then we post that back to HRMS and it updates HRMS. It takes that snapshot so it can compare, and then when we push that back, if the data has changed since the form was initiated, you'll get a pop-up. And then you can determine what you need to do with it. It'll have a screen where you can say, no, use this value, use that value. But you can say, don't allow duplicate forms that have that same data. So current pay is a good example. You may not want anybody to have a duplicate form out there where they're doing pay information, because one will override the other, and you want to make sure you got your history correct. Other forms, maybe you don't care. Maybe it's something like an event, because each event's going to have a specific thing. You don't care. It's an event date, and it's a multi-record table, so it'll insert a new record for each one. It's not overriding current pay. Each time there's only one current pay field for unit rate or hourly rate. So that's just kind of a fail-safe there. You want to ask questions about what we actually want with this form, and do we want duplicates to be available. Then this one's kind of new, prerequisite forms. Basically, you can say, in order to initiate this form, you have to have already initiated a group of forms or another form. So you can see here you've got a listing of your forms here, and then prerequisite actions must be initiated pending or complete, or completed with an effective date of less than X days ago. Again, relatively new, but what that allows you to do is say, hey, you can't initiate this action until this one's done, or this one's at least initiated. So might be steps there where you want them to be able to walk through a process, but they have to do step 1 before they can do step 2, and you can help control that here. Hide the audit trail of HR actions for self-service users. We just talked about that. When allow approvers to edit this, it will make an audit trail, or create an audit trail that will show you all of the changes made. So you may want that to be hidden, especially in a situation, that example I use, I as a supervisor said, hey, give my employee 5, my manager cut it to 3. You may not want the employee to be able to see that if they're on the approval process. Some of our clients on those pay changes, the employee is the final approver where they acknowledge, hey, I got an increase or a promotion, whatever it might be. So you may want to hide that if at times maybe, the information would be, don't want my employee upset with my manager because they reduced it from 5 to 3. So you can hide that there. Enable full audit of data changes. What this will do is once the form's initiated, any changes any changes that are made are tracked. So from beginning to end, to even posting back to HRMS, where typically allow approvers to edit or hide that audit, it stops once the approval process is done. But this would enable full audit changes post the completion. So if I made a change after everything was done and I update the action even after we posted it, maybe I updated something in there to make a correction, it will enable that full audit of data changes. And then this would highlight changes. So it says see parameters page for color setting. What this does is when you're setting up the parameters, and we'll look at that when we create that form from start to finish, you can say, hey, on this one, highlight changes with this color. Something new, something deleted. You can highlight it so when the approvers get it, they can kind of jump to the focus point of, hey, here's a highlighted area, and see what the changes were to help them streamline the approval process if they have a lot to do that. Hide completed action from employee. Maybe this is something where we don't want the employee, if the employee is involved in the approval sequence, once we're done with this, we don't want them to see the completed action in their file cabinet where they have access to basically everything they've involved with as an approver, initiator, or the employee. But if you have this one checked when it's done and completed, they won't be able to see it. You as admins will have access to absolutely everything, but this wouldn't be wouldn't have access to the employee. And then these two, relatively new within the last year, but you may have forms, and specifically something like an acknowledgement form, handbook acknowledgement form, where we don't have any fields on there. We just got a block of text, the legalese for acknowledging receipt of a handbook or a policy and procedure manual. What this does now is allow you to suppress that first and second field headers, so you don't see the current or new information. It just has an open text area for you. Same thing with this suppress second field header row. Basically, you can clear out the headers so they don't have them at all, and it's more of a simple acknowledgement form. That's general setup. The next video segment, we'll go through the next tab, and we'll go through each of these tabs individually, discuss all of the options and the details associated with that. So I appreciate your time. Thank you.